John Daniels had lived his whole life with unwavering certainty. A proud man from a small southern town, he believed the world was divided into us and them, and he never doubted which side he belonged to. His days were simple: mornings at the diner, afternoons at the auto shop, and evenings spent quietly grumbling about the world he thought was slipping away. To John, his views weren't hateful, they were just the truth. He didn't see the harm in the jokes, the side glances, or the walls he built between himself and others. He believed he was right, and that was enough. But everything changed one fateful evening. A sudden accident left John hovering between life and death, and in those fleeting moments, he saw something so terrifying, so undeniable, it broke him to his core. What he witnessed in the afterlife revealed the truth about himself, his choices, and the pain he caused. Truths he could never ignore. John came back from death with a mission, but redemption wouldn't come easy. This is the story of a man's reckoning with his past and the terrifying encounter that changed everything. Like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're from to hear more life-changing stories. My name is John Daniels, and for most of my life, I believed I had it all figured out. I grew up in a small town where things didn't change much, and honestly, I liked it that way. People who looked like me stuck to their own, and people who didn't, well, they kept their distance too, and that was fine by me. I wasn't a bad man, not in my mind at least. I worked hard, paid my bills, and didn't start trouble. But deep down, I carried a bitterness I couldn't even explain. I didn't think much about God, heaven, or any of that. Church was just something my wife Martha dragged me to every now and then. Even then, I'd sit in the back, arms crossed, just waiting for it to end so I could get back to my life. I figured I was a good enough person to get by. Live and let live, I told myself, though, looking back, I wasn't too good at letting others live. One evening, after closing up the shop, I headed home, driving the same stretch of road I'd taken 1,000 times before. It was raining lightly, just enough to make the road slick. I don't even remember what I was thinking about, probably something small, like what to eat for dinner. What I do remember is the headlights coming at me. Bright, blinding headlights. I swerved hard to the right, too hard. My truck spun out, hit the ditch, and flipped. Everything after that happened so fast, but it also felt like slow motion. The sound of glass shattering, metal crunching, and then silence. Just silence. I don't remember hitting my head, but I must have, because when I came to, I was outside my truck, looking down at my own body. At first I thought I was dreaming, or maybe I'd blacked out and hit my head too hard. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. I wasn't breathing. Panic hit me like a freight train. I tried shouting, but no sound came out. I tried moving, but my body stayed slumped over in the driver's seat. And that's when I saw it, this blinding light in the distance. At first, it was beautiful, like sunlight breaking through clouds, but the closer it got, the more it changed. It wasn't warm or inviting anymore. It was overwhelming, like it was peeling back every layer of who I was. And then I heard the voices, not the comforting kind. These were cries, angry, pained, desperate cries that seemed to come from everywhere. I could feel them, like they were clawing at me, showing me things I didn't want to see. Faces flashed before me, faces of people I'd ignored, dismissed, or hated without ever really knowing them. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The light forced me to see it all. The times I'd laughed at cruel jokes, the times I'd turned my back on someone in need, the times I'd let anger and judgment control me. I felt the weight of every word I'd spoken, every thought I'd had, every moment I'd chosen to hate instead of love. I don't know how long I was in that place. Minutes, hours, it felt like eternity. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard another voice. This one wasn't angry or pained. It was calm, steady, and full of authority. Is this who you want to be? I wanted to answer, but I couldn't speak. I just stood there, frozen, as the question hung in the air. Is this who you were made to be? And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Machines beeped around me, and Martha was sitting in the chair beside me, holding my hand and crying. I wanted to tell her what I'd seen, but I couldn't find the words. How do you explain something like that? How do you admit that the man you've been your whole life wasn't just wrong, but deeply, painfully broken? I didn't say anything that day. or the next. But I knew, as sure as I was alive, that I couldn't go back to being the man I was. For the first few days after I woke up, I kept telling myself it was just a hallucination. The doctors said my heart stopped for nearly 2 minutes, and they chalked it up to lack of oxygen and the trauma of the crash. Maybe they were right. Maybe that's all it was. But deep down, I knew better. The vision, or whatever it was, wasn't fading like a bad dream. It was vivid, burned into my mind as clearly as if it had just happened. Every face I'd seen, every voice I'd heard, every memory I'd been forced to relive. It was all still there, raw and heavy in my chest. And then there was that question. Is this who you were made to be? I couldn't shake it. I didn't even know what it meant, but it felt like it had been carved into my soul. Martha noticed right away that something was different. I wasn't much of a talker to begin with, but now I was practically silent. I couldn't even bring myself to look her in the eye, because all I could think about was how many times I'd taken her for granted. How many times I'd brushed off her kindness, her patience, her quiet faith. "John," she said one night as she sat beside me in the hospital, "you've been given a second chance. Don't waste it." She didn't know what I'd seen, but her words hit me like a hammer. A second chance. That's what it felt like. But how was I supposed to start over? I was 56 years old. You can't just undo decades of who you are, can you? When I was finally discharged, I tried to slip back into my old routines. Mornings at the diner, afternoons at the shop. But something had shifted. I'd sit at the table with the same old group, and instead of joining in on their usual jokes or complaints, I found myself staring out the window, replaying the crash and the light in my mind. "Earth to John," one of them said, laughing. "You still with us?" "Yeah," I mumbled, forcing a smile. But I wasn't. Even at the shop, where I'd always felt at ease, I started feeling restless. Every time a customer walked in, I found myself studying their faces, wondering if they'd been one of the people in my vision. I didn't even know if that made sense, but the thought haunted me. One afternoon, while I was cleaning up, my coworker Mike started grumbling about a new family that had moved into town. "They don't belong here," he said, spitting the words like venom. Normally, I would have nodded along, maybe even added my own 2 cents. But this time, something inside me twisted. I opened my mouth to respond, but all I could think about were those cries I'd heard in the vision. The weight of every hateful word I'd ever spoken. Instead, I just said, "I don't know, Mike. Maybe they're not so bad." Mike gave me a look like I'd grown a second head. "You feeling okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly, just thinking out loud. But that moment stuck with me. It was small, barely anything, but it felt like the first crack in a wall I'd spent my whole life building. At home, things weren't much easier. Martha was patient, but I could tell she was waiting for me to talk. And I wanted to. I really did. But every time I tried to bring it up, the words got stuck in my throat. One night after dinner, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her Bible open in front of her. "You've been different since the accident," she said softly. "I don't know what's going on, but you don't have to carry it alone." I stared at her, the words pressing against my chest. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd seen my own hatred reflected back at me, that I'd felt the weight of my sins like a mountain on my shoulders, that I didn't even know who I was anymore. But all I managed to say was, "I'm trying, Martha. I'm really trying." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the light, the voices, and that question, is this who you were made to be? I didn't know where to start, but I knew I couldn't keep living the way I had. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up the Bible that had been gathering dust on the shelf and opened it. I didn't even know where to start reading, so I just flipped to a random page. My eyes landed on a verse I'd heard in passing, but never really thought about. "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." Forgive? I didn't even know where to begin with that. How do you forgive others when you can't even forgive yourself? But that was the start. It wasn't much, and I still had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Over the next few weeks, I did my best to push through the fog I was living in. The Bible sat on the nightstand now, and every so often, I'd crack it open and read a verse or two. Most of it didn't make much sense to me, but the words stayed with me. They had weight, more weight than anything I'd read before. Still, the vision wouldn't let me rest. The faces haunted me, especially one in particular. It was a boy, no older than 10 or 12, with big, sad eyes. I didn't recognize him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was connected to me somehow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him staring at me, like he was waiting for something. One Sunday morning, Martha asked if I'd come to church with her. Normally, I would have found some excuse, too tired, too busy, but this time I nodded. "Yeah, I'll go," I said, and the surprise on her face almost made me laugh. The sermon that morning was about forgiveness. The pastor, a wiry man with a booming voice, spoke about letting go of bitterness and seeking reconciliation. "You can't walk in the light," he said, "if you're still dragging chains from the darkness." His words hit me hard. I sat there, staring at the floor, feeling like every eye in the church was on me. When the service ended, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Martha didn't say anything on the way home, but I could tell she was waiting for me to speak. That afternoon, I decided to take a drive. I needed to clear my head. I didn't have a destination in mind, but somehow, I ended up on the edge of town, near the old train tracks. I parked the truck and got out, breathing in the cool autumn air. The place was quiet, almost eerily so, and for a moment I just stood there, staring down the empty tracks. And then it hit me. The boy. The memory came rushing back like a flood, so vivid it almost knocked me over. I was 16, hanging out with a group of older kids who'd always seemed so cool to me. We were drinking beers we'd stolen from someone's dad, laughing and joking around. Then we saw him, the boy. He was black, maybe 9 or 10, riding his bike near the tracks. One of the guys made a joke about scaring him, and before I knew it, we were chasing him down. I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just followed the group, laughing like it was some big game. The boy tried to ride faster, but we cornered him near the trestle bridge. One of the guys grabbed his bike and shoved it down the hill, and another started yelling at him, calling him every slur you can think of. I didn't touch him, but I stood there. I laughed. I let it happen. Eventually, the boy ran off, tears streaming down his face. We went back to our beers like nothing had happened. Standing there by the tracks, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had buried that memory so deep, I'd almost convinced myself it didn't happen. But now I couldn't escape it. That boy wasn't just some face in my vision. He was a part of my story, a part I'd ignored for decades. I dropped to my knees right there by the tracks, my chest heaving like I'd been punched. "God," I whispered, "what am I supposed to do with this?" For a long time, there was only silence. Then in my mind, I heard that voice again. "Is this who you were made to be?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know who I was supposed to be, only that I couldn't stay the man I'd been. That night, I told Martha everything. The vision, the boy, the memory. She sat quietly as I spoke, her face pale and her eyes wide. When I finally finished, she took my hand in hers and said, "You have to make this right, John." "I don't even know where to start," I said, my voice shaking. She squeezed my hand. "Pray, and then go find him." Find him. The thought terrified me, but deep down, I knew she was right. If I was ever going to move forward, I had to face the past. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. I couldn't get the boy's face out of my mind, and now that I'd confessed to Martha, it felt like the weight of what I'd done had doubled. Martha was kind, but she didn't let me off the hook. Every night, as we sat together at the table, she'd gently ask, "Did you pray? Have you started looking for him?" I hadn't. I told myself it was because I didn't know where to start, but the truth was I was afraid. What if I found him and he didn't remember? What if he did remember? What if he hated me for what I'd done? One evening, as Martha cleared the dishes, she said something that stuck with me. "God doesn't bring things to the surface for no reason. If he's showing this to you now, it's because you're ready to deal with it." "Ready," I muttered, shaking my head. "I don't feel ready." "You don't have to feel ready," she said. "You just have to trust him." The next morning, I finally made a decision. I dug out the old yearbook from my junior year of high school, hoping it might jog my memory. The boy wasn't in it. Of course, he wouldn't have been. But seeing the faces of my classmates brought back more memories than I expected. I found myself thinking about that group I used to hang out with. Most of them had left town years ago, but one name stood out: Billy Rogers. Billy had been there that day by the tracks, and as far as I knew, he still lived a few towns over. It felt like a long shot, but I decided to reach out. The next day, I drove to Billy's house, my palms sweating as I gripped the steering wheel. When he answered the door, I barely recognized him. The years hadn't been kind to Billy. His face was weathered, his eyes dull, and he carried himself like a man who'd seen too many hard days. "John Daniels," he said, squinting at me. "I'll be damned. What brings you out here?" I hesitated. How was I supposed to explain this? "I've been thinking about the past," I said finally. "There's something I need to make right, and I need your help." Billy raised an eyebrow. "What kind of help?" "Do you remember that kid we chased down by the tracks?" I asked. For a moment, he just stared at me, and I wondered if I'd made a mistake coming here. Then he let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, I remember. Why? You looking to clear your conscience or something?" "I need to find him," I said. Billy shook his head. "Man, that was decades ago. I don't even remember his name." I felt my stomach drop. "You don't have any idea?" "Nope," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "But I can tell you this much. He lived over by Pine Street. Might have gone to Lincoln Elementary. That's about all I've got for you." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few days, I began piecing together what I could. I visited the library, digging through old school records and community archives. I even went back to the neighborhood where the boy had lived, knocking on doors and talking to anyone who would listen. Most people didn't remember him, but one older woman thought she might. "A boy named Samuel used to live on Pine Street," she said. "His family moved away, though. I think it was after his dad passed." "Do you know where they went?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. She shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't." That night, I sat in the living room with my head in my hands. "What if I can't find him?" I said to Martha. She knelt beside me, her hands on my knees. "Then you keep praying. God brought you this far, didn't he? He'll take you the rest of the way." The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. I was at the grocery store when I ran into a man named Eric, who had grown up in the same neighborhood as the boy. We got to talking, and when I mentioned the name Samuel, his face lit up. "Yeah, I remember Samuel. He was a good kid, quiet though. His mom moved him to the city after his dad passed. I think they ended up in Cleveland." "Cleveland," I repeated, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. "Yeah," Eric said. "I don't know where they are now, but last I heard, he was working as a teacher. A teacher." Somehow that detail hit me harder than anything else. The boy I had tormented had grown up to teach others, to guide them, to protect them. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, I sat down with Martha and told her what I'd learned. "Cleveland's a big place," I said. "I don't even know where to start." "You start with the first step," she said. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove to Cleveland. The drive to Cleveland felt longer than it was, with each passing mile giving my thoughts more room to spiral. What if Samuel wasn't there? What if he wanted nothing to do with me? What if I found him, but the words I needed didn't come? The radio hummed in the background, but I barely heard it, drowning in the weight of possibilities. By the time I reached Cleveland, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I checked into a modest motel on the edge of town, sat on the lumpy mattress, and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. I didn't sleep much that night. At one point, I found myself flipping through the Gideon Bible that had been tucked in the bedside drawer. I landed on Matthew 5:23-24. "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift." The verse hit me like a freight train. I knew this wasn't just about finding Samuel. It was about reconciling with God, too. The next morning, armed with little more than hope and determination, I began my search. Cleveland was sprawling, far bigger than I'd imagined, and I quickly realized how daunting this task would be. I started by calling schools, one after another, asking if a Samuel who might have grown up in my hometown was on their staff. Most of the time, I got polite but firm no's, and the occasional awkward pause when someone thought my request sounded strange. It was disheartening, but I kept going. By the second day, I had visited 2 community centers, a few libraries, and even a small church where I thought I might find someone who knew him. But nothing. That night, I found myself walking aimlessly down a quiet street, the cool night air biting at my cheeks. I stopped in front of a park bench, sat down, and buried my face in my hands. God, I whispered, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know if I'm going to find him. But if you want me to do this, then I need your help. I need you to show me the way. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally looked up, something caught my eye. A small cafe across the street. The lights inside were warm and inviting, and there was a sign in the window that read, "Open late." Without thinking, I crossed the street and went inside. The place was nearly empty, save for a barista behind the counter and a man sitting by the window with a cup of coffee and a laptop. I ordered a coffee and sat down at a table, trying to clear my mind. That's when I overheard their conversation. The barista had walked over to the man by the window, handing him a refill. "How's the tutoring program going, Mr. Edwards?" she asked. "It's going well," the man said with a smile. "The kids are great. They're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them." Mr. Edwards. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be him? I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten, and studied the man. He looked to be about the right age, early 40s maybe, and his demeanor was calm and kind. But was it him? I waited until the barista walked away before summoning every ounce of courage I had. I stood up, walked over to his table, and cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said. He looked up, his expression polite but guarded. "Yes? Are you Samuel Edwards?" His brow furrowed. "Who's asking?" "My name's John Daniels," I said, my voice trembling. I think I owe you an apology." For a moment, he just stared at me, and I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. But then something shifted in his expression. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something else, something heavier. "You," he said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. "I've been looking for you," I said. "There's something I need to tell you." He didn't say anything at first, just gestured for me to sit down. My hands were shaking as I lowered myself into the chair across from him. "Go on," he said, his voice steady but cold. I took a deep breath. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted, "but I need you to know how sorry I am for what I did to you back then, for what I let happen. I've carried that memory for years, but I buried it so deep, I almost convinced myself it didn't happen. And then I had this experience, and it brought everything back. I knew I had to find you. I had to tell you the truth." Samuel didn't say anything, his gaze fixed on me like he was trying to see into my soul. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "Why now?" he asked. "Because I saw the truth," I said. "I saw how wrong I was, how hateful, how blind, and I can't live with myself if I don't make this right." For a long moment, there was silence between us. Then Samuel shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You think an apology fixes everything?" "No," I said quickly. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm trying to change." Samuel looked away, his jaw tight. "You don't know what that day did to me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't," I admitted. "But if there's anything I can do to help to make amends, I want to do it." His eyes met mine again, and for the first time, I saw something in them that wasn't anger. It wasn't forgiveness either, but it was a start. Samuel and I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The cafe's warm light seemed to dim around us, isolating our table from the world. His face was unreadable, calm but guarded, like someone who had learned to build walls so high, even he didn't know what was behind them anymore. "I don't know what you expect me to say," Samuel finally said, his voice measured. "You're here after all these years and I'm supposed to do what? Shake your hand? Thank you for ruining my life?" I flinched, the bitterness in his words cutting deep. "I don't expect anything," I said quietly. "I just needed you to know that I remember, that I'm sorry." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "You remember, huh? Well, let me remind you of a few things, just in case you've forgotten." His voice was steady, but the anger behind it was unmistakable. "Do you remember how I begged you to stop? How I cried while you and your friends laughed at me? How I had to walk home that day with my clothes ripped and my dignity in shreds?" I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I remember, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No, you don't, he snapped. You remember what you did, sure, but you don't remember what it felt like to be on the other side of it. You don't remember the nights I lay awake, wondering why I wasn't good enough, why people like you hated me just for existing. You don't remember how I started hating myself because of it. His words hit me like blows, each one heavier than the last. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the pain I could see etched on his face. But I knew there was nothing I could say to take it back. You came here for closure, Samuel continued, his voice shaking now. But what about my closure? You ever think about that? I've spent my whole life trying to forget what you and your friends did to me, and now you show up out of nowhere, dredging it all up again. For what? To make yourself feel better? No, I said firmly, looking him in the eye. I didn't come here to feel better. I came here because I needed to face what I did, because I needed to face you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Samuel shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Forgiveness? You really think it's that simple, don't you? Just say you're sorry and wipe the slate clean. No, I don't, I said, my voice cracking. I know it's not simple. I know it's going to take more than words to make this right, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You want to make it right? Fine. Here's what you can do. Don't come back into my life and expect me to fix your guilt for you. I've spent too long trying to move on to let you drag me back into that place. His words stung, but I nodded. If that's what you want, I'll respect it. But if you ever change your mind, if there's ever anything I can do to help, you know where to find me. Samuel didn't respond. He just stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty chair across from me. I had come to Cleveland hoping for redemption, for some kind of resolution to the guilt I'd carried for so long. But instead, I was left with the realization that forgiveness wasn't something I could demand or even expect. The next few days were heavy. I went back to my motel, unsure of what to do next. I'd followed God's prompting to find Samuel, but now I was questioning everything. Had I only made things worse by showing up? Was this God's way of showing me that some wounds couldn't be healed? On the third day, I decided to attend a church service at a small chapel near the motel. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a little peace, maybe a chance to hear something that would help me make sense of everything. The sermon that day was about forgiveness, but not the kind I had been thinking about. The pastor spoke about how forgiveness isn't just for the person being forgiven, it's also for the one doing the forgiving. When you hold on to anger, he said, you're not just punishing the other person, you're punishing yourself. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door to your own freedom. I thought about Samuel and the anger he had every right to feel. I thought about the pain I had caused him and how it had shaped his life in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. And for the first time, I realized that my journey wasn't just about seeking his forgiveness. It was about doing the work to make myself the kind of person who deserved it. After the service, I stayed behind to pray. I asked God for guidance, for the strength to keep moving forward, even if Samuel never forgave me. And as I sat there in the quiet of the chapel, I felt a strange sense of peace, not because everything was resolved, but because I knew I was on the right path. 2 days later, as I was packing up to leave Cleveland, I got a call. It was an unknown number, and for a moment I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hello, I said. There was a pause on the other end, and then a familiar voice. It's Samuel. My heart leapt into my throat. Samuel, Don't, he interrupted. Don't say anything yet. Just listen. I sat down on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone tightly. I've been thinking about what you said, he continued, about how you want to make things right. I don't know if that's possible, but I think we need to talk again, face to face. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. Thank you, I said quietly. Don't thank me yet, he said. This isn't going to be easy, for either of us. I understand, I said. There was another pause, and then he said, meet me at the park on Cedar Avenue tomorrow morning. We'll talk then. And just like that, the call ended. As I put the phone down, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, fear, and something that felt almost like hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The next morning, I stood outside the park on Cedar Avenue, the early morning fog swirling around me, adding a surreal stillness to the world. I could hear the distant sound of birds chirping, but it did little to calm my racing thoughts. Was this meeting going to change anything? Was I prepared to face what might come next? I checked my watch. I had arrived early, and Samuel wasn't there yet. I leaned against the trunk of an old oak tree, my eyes scanning the empty park. A part of me felt like I had done all I could, reached out, apologized, admitted my faults. But now it was up to Samuel whether or not any of this would lead to healing. As the minutes stretched on, I wrestled with doubt. What if he was just showing up to tell me to leave him alone forever? What if my attempts to make amends had only stirred up old wounds that were better left untouched? Or worse, what if I was standing here for nothing, just prolonging the inevitable pain of rejection? I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't hear Samuel approach until he was right in front of me. He didn't look any different from the man I had met days earlier, yet there was something in his eyes, a kind of determination mixed with vulnerability, that wasn't there before. He stood still for a moment, just looking at me, his face unreadable. "John," he said softly, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. "You came back." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I told you I would." For a long moment, we stood in silence, neither of us sure what to say. The weight of the years, the pain, the brokenness, all seemed to hang between us like a tangible thing. It felt impossible to know how to bridge that gap, even though I was desperate to. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice tight. "Something I've never told anyone, and I don't know why I'm telling you now, but maybe it's because you asked for forgiveness. Maybe it's because I've been carrying this inside me for so long that it's eating me alive." I felt a chill run through me. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Samuel looked away for a moment, his eyes scanning the empty park. He hesitated, like he was unsure if he should continue. But then he met my gaze again, his eyes intense and filled with unspoken emotion. "That day, when you and your friends, when you attacked me," he said, his voice faltering slightly, "I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just embarrassed. I was broken, John, in ways you'll never understand. But there was something else that happened that day, something that changed the course of my life." I felt a knot form in my stomach, my heart pounding. I could feel the tension building between us, an invisible force drawing us together, and yet pulling us apart all at once. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took a deep breath, as if trying to steady himself. After I walked home, I sat in my room for hours, just replaying everything in my mind. I was ashamed of myself, ashamed of the way I looked, ashamed of how you all made me feel. But something else happened that night. I had a dream. A dream, the word hit me like a jolt. "A dream?" I repeated, confusion swirling in my mind. Samuel nodded, his expression far away. "Yes, I know it sounds crazy, but in that dream, I saw something I can't explain. It wasn't just a vision of what happened to me. It was a vision of what was going to happen to you too. And everything in that dream felt real, like I was seeing the future. And that's why I hated you, John. That's why I couldn't forgive you for so long." My pulse quickened as I tried to process what he was saying. "You saw something. About me?" "Yes," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you die." The words hit me like a physical blow. My throat went dry, and for a moment I could barely breathe. What do you mean, you saw me die?" Samuel shook his head, his hands trembling as he wiped his face. "I don't know how to explain it, but I saw you lying in a hospital bed. I saw you taking your last breath. And I saw the way people reacted. Not just the people who knew you, but even the people who hated you. I saw that they didn't know what to think. They didn't know what to feel, because they had judged you your whole life, and now you were gone." I could barely keep my feet under me. My head was spinning. "What does that have to do with what happened between us?" I asked, the words coming out in a rush. "Because after I saw that," Samuel said, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity, I realized that you and I weren't so different, that we were both living our lives, making choices, hurting people, and then we were both going to die one day, maybe sooner than we expected. And in that moment, I understood something. I understood that the hate I carried in my heart, it wasn't just hurting you, it was hurting me too. The air between us grew thick, heavy with what had just been revealed. It felt like everything in my life had led up to this one moment, and yet the truth was so hard to grasp. Samuel's words cut through the confusion and fear, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the decisions I had made, not just with him, but in every part of my life. "You saw my death?" I asked, my voice trembling. "But why didn't you tell me sooner?" Samuel looked down, his eyes clouded with pain. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "I thought if I told you, you wouldn't believe me, or worse, you'd think I was crazy. But now I realize it wasn't just a dream, it was a warning." A warning. I stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of the pieces Samuel had just handed me. He had seen my death in a dream, a death that hadn't happened yet, but one that would one day come. And in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just about Samuel's forgiveness. It wasn't even about my own redemption. There was something far bigger at play, a deeper truth that was beyond our understanding. Samuel had seen a glimpse of the future, and I couldn't help but wonder, what was I supposed to do with that knowledge now? The next few days after Samuel's revelation passed in a blur. My mind was consumed with the vision he had shared, the strange dream where he saw me die, the undeniable weight it carried, and the questions that were flooding my thoughts. It was as if I had stepped into a world where the boundaries between the known and the unknown were collapsing, and I was left struggling to make sense of it all. What did it all mean? Why had Samuel been shown this, and why now? The more I thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces didn't seem to fit together. But there was something in that dream, in his words, that I couldn't shake. I needed answers. I decided to reach out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my sister, Rebecca. She had always been the one person in my family who understood me, even when I didn't understand myself. Maybe, just maybe, she could help me make sense of what Samuel had told me. We met at a small diner on the edge of town, and as soon as she sat down across from me, I could see the concern in her eyes. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," she said softly, reaching for her coffee. "What's going on, John?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to even begin. The truth was, I wasn't sure what was happening anymore. The closer I got to understanding Samuel's experience, the more tangled my own life became. "I'm not sure how to explain this," I said finally, my hands fidgeting with the edge of the napkin in front of me. "But Samuel, he told me something." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Samuel? I haven't heard you mention his name in a long time. What's going on with him?" He saw something about me." I paused, trying to choose my words carefully. "He had a dream, a vision, I guess, and he saw me die." Rebecca looked at me, her expression unreadable. "He saw you die?" "Yeah," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And he says it was more than just a dream. He thinks it was a warning." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her gaze steady as she processed what I'd just said. "John, are you sure you believe him?" she asked carefully, not dismissing me but searching for clarity. "I mean, it's a pretty heavy thing to carry. A dream about your death? That sounds like something out of a movie, not real life." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't know what to think, but there's something about it that feels different. Like it's not just about me, like it's about everything I've done, everything I've chosen, the choices I've made in my life." Rebecca's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, placing a hand over mine. "John, I know you've been through a lot, but I also know that you've always believed in something bigger than yourself. Whatever's going on, I think you need to trust that it's part of your journey. Maybe Samuel's warning isn't just about your death, it's about your life too." Her words hit me with a force I hadn't expected. I had spent so much time consumed by the fear of death, of what might happen when my time came, that I had forgotten the bigger picture. Maybe this wasn't just a warning about an end. Maybe it was a sign for me to start living in a way that honored the choices I still had left to make. "I think you're right," I said softly, squeezing her hand in return. I've been so focused on the fear of what's to come that I haven't been living in the moment. Maybe I've been given a second chance to live differently, to make up for the things I've done. Rebecca smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. You always did have a way of seeing the good, even in the darkest places. But don't forget, this is about your redemption too. Whatever path you choose from here on out, it's yours to make. As I left the diner, I felt a sense of clarity settle over me. Rebecca's words had struck a chord deep within me. Maybe Samuel's vision wasn't just a warning about the end of my life. It was a reminder to start living it right, to start living with purpose, with kindness, and with a renewed understanding of what truly mattered. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were still pieces of the puzzle I hadn't yet put together. Samuel's dream wasn't the only mystery. There were people in my past I hadn't yet faced. People I had hurt, people I had wronged, people I would need to confront if I was going to truly change. One of those people was Kyle. Kyle and I had grown up together, but the last time we spoke, it had been during one of our many heated arguments. We'd both changed so much, but I knew I couldn't move forward without facing the unresolved anger between us. I had to talk to him, even if it meant reopening old wounds. That night, I made the call. Kyle answered on the second ring. "What do you want, John?" he asked, his tone cold and distant. "Kyle, we need to talk," I said, trying to steady my nerves. "There's something I've been carrying for a long time, and I don't think I can move forward until we deal with it." "I don't know if I'm interested in hearing what you have to say," he replied, the bitterness clear in his voice. "I know," I said, "but I think you need to hear it. I owe you an apology, and I know that won't fix everything, but it's the first step." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke. "Fine, meet me tomorrow at the old spot. We'll see if you've really changed." The old spot was the rundown place where we used to hang out after school. It hadn't been the same since the days when we were teenagers, but it was where our friendship had once been formed, and where it had once been broken. As I hung up the phone, my mind raced. What if Kyle didn't believe me? What if he rejected me the way I had rejected so many people in my past? But I knew that I couldn't keep running from my mistakes. The only way forward was through the hard conversations, the painful confessions, and the raw honesty. Tomorrow, I would face Kyle. I would face the ghosts of my past, and I would make sure that, no matter what, I didn't run away this time. The morning was still and heavy with anticipation as I drove to the old spot. The air felt thicker than usual, like the weight of the past was pressing down on me with every passing mile. Kyle was right. I had to face everything that had happened, everything I had done. I couldn't pretend that the past didn't exist anymore, and I certainly couldn't escape the reality of what I'd become. When I pulled into the gravel parking lot, my heart was pounding in my chest. I spotted Kyle standing by the rusted chain-link fence that surrounded the empty lot. He looked different, older, harder, like time had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes were still the same. They were full of bitterness, full of resentment. I parked the car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounding too loud in the silence. "John," Kyle said when I approached, his voice flat. There was no warmth, no anger, just an empty acknowledgement. "You're here. I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up." "I almost didn't," I admitted, my throat tight. "But I need to say this. I need to apologize for everything, for what I did to you, for the way I treated you. I've been carrying it around for so long, and I'm tired of running from it." Kyle didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the ground. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, and the silence between us stretched on until I thought I might choke on it. But then he spoke. "You think an apology fixes things, John? You think that's enough to make up for the years you spent treating me like dirt?" His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw the raw pain in his eyes. "You left me, John. You turned your back on me when I needed you the most. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" I flinched, the guilt hitting me harder than I expected. This was it, the moment when all my past mistakes came rushing to the surface. I had hurt people. I had been selfish, arrogant, and blind to the needs of others. And Kyle had been one of the people I had left behind. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix it, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. But I'm here now. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or ever. But I want you to know that I am truly sorry for everything. Kyle's eyes narrowed, and I could see the internal battle playing out on his face. He wanted to push me away. He wanted to remind me of all the reasons he had every right to hate me. But there was something else there, too. Something that looked like doubt. Like he was considering the possibility of forgiveness, even if only for a second. You've been saying sorry for years, John, he said, his voice hard. But you never meant it before. What's different now? I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. This wasn't just about making amends. It was about owning up to the person I had been and the person I was trying to become. It was about showing Kyle and everyone else I had wronged that I was no longer that selfish, hateful person. I meant it then too, I said, my voice low but steady. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand the pain I was causing you. I was too lost in my own anger and fear. But I see now what I've done. I can't change the past, Kyle. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to make things right, if you can. For a long moment, Kyle didn't speak. The tension between us was so thick I could hardly breathe. I thought I could feel the weight of everything I had done, everything I had failed to do, bearing down on me. This was the point of no return. I couldn't go back to the way things had been, not after this conversation. Finally, Kyle looked me in the eye, his expression unreadable. I don't know if I can forgive you, John. Not yet. But I'll tell you one thing. You've got a long road ahead if you want to fix things with me. I nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick, but it was a start, and sometimes that's all you need, a start. I'll take whatever time you need, I said. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Kyle looked at me for a moment longer, then let out a sigh. You might not be the same guy I used to know, John, but if you're serious about this, I'll give you a shot. A weight lifted off my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a chance to rebuild, to repair, to heal. As Kyle turned and walked away, something inside me shifted. I felt like I had just passed a test of my willingness to face the consequences of my actions and to take responsibility for the pain I had caused. It wasn't the end of my journey, it was the beginning of something new, something real. The next step in my journey was clear. I had to make things right, not just with Kyle, but with everyone I had hurt along the way. But even more than that, I had to find peace within myself. The truth that Samuel had shown me about my death, it wasn't just about what was to come. It was about what I was doing with the time I had left, and I wasn't going to waste any more of it. The days after my conversation with Kyle were heavy, yet strangely freeing. A part of me felt lighter, like I was finally stepping into the truth, but the rest of me remained plagued by doubt. I had confronted Kyle, but that wasn't the end of it. I knew deep down there were still so many other people to face, so many things I needed to change about myself if I was going to truly walk a different path. The dream Samuel had shared with me still haunted me, and the urgency to change was like a fire burning in my chest. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I couldn't keep running from the truth that my life had been a series of broken promises, betrayals, and false starts. As the weeks passed, I started to make small changes. I reached out to others I had hurt in the past, and while the responses varied, some were open, others hostile, I faced each interaction head-on. Every apology was met with mixed emotions, but each one brought me closer to where I needed to be. Still, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something far greater than personal redemption. Then one night, I received a call. It was from my father. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name flash on my phone. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the last time I'd been home for Christmas, when the argument over my life choices had escalated into something we couldn't come back from. I hesitated for a moment before answering. John, my father's voice crackled on the other end, older than I remembered, but still strong. I've been hearing things about you. People are saying you've changed, that you're doing better. Is that true? I didn't know how to respond. The man on the other end of the phone wasn't the same one who had left us all those years ago. He was different too. We had both spent so long in our pride, both carrying the weight of resentment. And now, As adults, we were both just trying to figure out how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying to make things right, Dad." There was a long pause on the line, and I could hear him shifting, unsure of what to say next. "I've been thinking, John. I've been thinking about a lot of things, and I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you or if I ever will be. But I think it's time we talked. We need to talk about everything." That was all I needed to hear. The door was finally opening. This wasn't just an apology or a conversation. This was the turning point. This was where I would either face everything that had haunted me over the years or walk away, continuing to let the past control me. The next morning, I drove to my father's house. The same house I had spent so many years resenting. The same place I had walked away from, angry and confused, seeking an identity elsewhere. Now I was walking back, trying to reclaim the part of myself I had lost in the process. When I knocked on the door, my father answered, his face as serious as I had ever seen it. He led me into the living room without a word, and we both sat down in silence, the weight of years pressing in around us. "I've been hearing a lot about your so-called spiritual awakening," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Is that what this is? Some kind of journey you're on now?" I nodded, but it was more than just a journey. It was a reckoning, a confrontation with all the things I had done and the life I had lived, the things I had ignored for so long. "I'm not sure what you think of me anymore, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't some phase. This isn't just about me getting better. This is about me facing the truth about myself, about everything I've done, everything I've been." My father's eyes hardened. "You think you can change all that? You think you can change the years of damage you've done to this family?" I swallowed hard, not sure how to explain the depths of what had been revealed to me. The things I had seen and experienced in the wake of Samuel's vision, the changes in me that I didn't know how to explain. I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I wasn't even sure if I deserved it, but I was asking for a chance. "I don't know if I can change everything, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I know I have to try. I can't keep living this way. I can't keep running from the man I've been. I've learned something about myself, about my choices, and about God. I've learned that I can't do this on my own, and I can't keep hurting the people I love." There was a long silence between us, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in my father's eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the possibility of it, the possibility of reconciliation. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've always been stubborn, John. You always thought you knew best, but I'll be honest with you, son, this isn't easy for me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but maybe we can start somewhere." My heart swelled in my chest. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was the beginning of something, a crack in the wall we had built between us, and that crack was enough for me to hold on to. "I'm willing to start," I said, my voice firm. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The confrontation with my father was just one step in a much larger journey, but it was the hardest. For years I had avoided the very people I needed to face the most, my family, my past, my mistakes. Now, I was forced to confront it all. I had to decide if I would continue down the path of redemption or retreat into the safety of what I had always known. As I left my father's house that day, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The road ahead was unclear, but for the first time, I could see a flicker of light at the end of it. The days following my conversation with my father felt like a whirlwind. The cracks in my past were no longer easy to ignore, and every step I took seemed to unravel another layer of my old self. The guilt weighed on me, and yet the weight of the guilt was nothing compared to the feeling of hope that began to grow within me. For the first time, I wasn't just existing in the chaos of my own mistakes. I was actively trying to repair the damage I had caused. It wasn't easy. Each day brought its own challenge, its own test. But in the middle of it all, I started to feel something stirring within me, a sense of purpose, of clarity that had been absent for so long. Then, everything changed again. It happened one night, when I least expected it. I had spent the day helping a friend who was struggling with addiction. I had shared the story of my own struggles with him, how I had been lost, how I had hit rock bottom and felt like I was beyond redemption. As I spoke, I realized something that I hadn't truly acknowledged before. My past wasn't just a burden, it was a gift. It was only through the mess, the pain, the brokenness that I had come to know the truth. The truth about grace, about forgiveness, about the depth of God's love. I was sitting in my car afterward, the weight of what I had said still lingering in my chest, when I heard a knock on my window. I jumped, startled. I turned to see Kyle standing there, his face unreadable in the dim light. I rolled the window down, still catching my breath. "Kyle, what's going on?" He stood there for a moment, staring at me as if he was measuring something. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual, "about what you said, about everything." I was quiet, unsure of what he meant. Had he changed his mind? Did he think I was just playing some game? "I've spent years hating you, John," Kyle continued, his eyes meeting mine. "I've blamed you for everything, for my failures, for how we fell apart, for the way you just walked away and left me to pick up the pieces. But I'm starting to see something else now. I'm starting to see that maybe you didn't know how much you were hurting." I swallowed, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just an apology. This was something bigger. Kyle was acknowledging his own pain, his own struggles. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about me redeeming myself. This was about both of us finding healing in the wreckage of our past. "I never meant to hurt you, Kyle," I said quietly, the words heavy in the air. "I was blind. I was so caught up in my own anger that I couldn't see what I was doing to you. But I'm sorry, truly sorry." Kyle nodded, his expression softening. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and I thought maybe he had nothing else to say. But then, finally, he spoke again. "You're not the person I remember, John," he said, his voice steady. "And maybe I'm not the person I used to be either. But I'm willing to try to rebuild something, whatever that looks like. Maybe it won't be easy. Maybe it'll take time, but I'm willing to try." A rush of emotions flooded through me. Hope, relief, and something deeper, something that felt like peace. Just then I got a call from my mother. My throat tightened as I answered, bracing myself for another difficult conversation. "John, I've been thinking about you," she said, her voice wavering. "I know things have been hard between us, but I want to tell you something. I see the changes in you. I don't know if I can forgive everything, but I see the effort, and I want to believe you can be the person you're trying to be." Her words were like balm to my soul. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. It was as if the chains of my past, the shame that had defined me for so long, were beginning to loosen. I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be smooth. I knew there were still struggles to come. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that I could rebuild my life. Hope that the person I had become, the person I was choosing to be, could be enough. And in that moment, I realized something else. It wasn't just about me finding redemption. It was about everyone I loved and everyone I had hurt finding redemption together. This wasn't just my journey, it was ours. The truth Samuel had shown me, the truth I had struggled with for so long, wasn't just a revelation for me. It was a call to something bigger. It was a call to reconciliation, to healing, to restoration. The tension had reached its peak. The choices I had made, the consequences I had lived with, had all brought me to this moment. I had come to understand that I could no longer live in the shadows of my past, and I could no longer allow fear and guilt to control me. This was the moment when I had to decide who I was going to be, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been a part of my life. The day finally came when I had to confront the full depth of my transformation. Everything I had learned, all the pain I had processed, and all the changes I had made were about to come to a head. I felt it in my bones, a sense of urgency, like something was about to happen that would either solidify my journey or completely unravel everything I had worked toward. It had been weeks since my conversation with Kyle, and we had started to rebuild the relationship that had been so fractured. My relationship with my father was still fragile, but there was hope. I could feel it in the small moments, when he didn't pull away from a hug, or when he let me sit beside him in silence, as if we were silently beginning to understand each other again. My mother had also reached out, cautiously, but her words were gentle and filled with a quiet compassion that I hadn't expected. But despite these moments of healing, I knew deep down that there was one person I hadn't yet fully confronted: myself. One night, Samuel called. He had been a steady presence in my life since the dream, the one who had reminded me, time and again, that I wasn't walking this path alone. He had kept me grounded when I felt like I was drowning in the enormity of everything I had to change. But now, he had something else to share. "John, you need to come to the church. Now," he said, urgency in his voice. "I've seen something that can't wait." I didn't ask questions. I knew better by now than to ignore his words. I grabbed my keys and drove to the church, a place that had once felt foreign to me, a place I had avoided for so many years. But now, it felt like the place I needed to be, the place where my past, present, and future were all intertwined. When I arrived, Samuel was standing outside the church, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You've been through so much, John," he said quietly, as if the weight of his words carried the gravity of everything I had experienced. "But there's one more thing you need to understand. This isn't just about you. It's about all of us. It's about the truth that God has shown you, and now you have to share it." I swallowed hard. My hands trembled and my heart began to race. I had been through so much to get to this point, but the thought of truly opening up to others, the thought of sharing everything I had learned, everything I had seen in my near-death experience, terrified me. Samuel reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. "You've been given a gift, John, and it's not just for you, it's for everyone." I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek as I realized the truth of his words. All this time, I had been so focused on my own redemption, so consumed with my own healing, that I had forgotten the power of sharing what I had been through. I had to face the truth that what I had experienced in my near-death journey wasn't just a personal awakening. It was a message that needed to be shared with others, no matter how terrifying it was to open up about it. Inside the church, there were a few people gathered: Kyle, my father, my mother, and a few friends I had made along the way. Each of them looked at me expectantly, like they were waiting for something. I realized then that I wasn't just facing the final hurdle of my personal journey. I was facing the opportunity to help others see what I had seen, to help them understand the grace and love that had been revealed to me. I stood in front of them, feeling my heart pound in my chest. My voice was shaky, but I knew I had to speak. I had to tell them everything. "I know you all have seen me struggle," I began, my voice growing steadier with each word. "I know you've seen me make mistakes, and I know you've seen the pain I've caused. But I've seen something that has changed everything for me. Something that I can't ignore anymore. I've seen the truth about who I am, about who we all are. I've seen the love of God, and I've felt His grace in a way that I can't explain, but I know it's real." I looked at each of their faces. Kyle, who had stood by me through it all, my father, who had reluctantly come to understand me, my mother, who was still finding the strength to forgive. They were all here, willing to listen, willing to witness the culmination of my journey. "This journey hasn't been easy," I continued, the words coming faster now, like they had been waiting to spill out. "I've fought against it, I've run from it, I've doubted it. But now I know the truth. The truth is that we're all capable of change. We're all capable of redemption, no matter how far we've fallen. God's love is bigger than any mistake we've made. And it's not just for me, it's for all of us." The room was silent for a moment, and then something shifted. My father, who had always been the stoic, hard man, stood up. His face was weathered with time, but there was a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He stepped toward me, and for the first time in my life, he reached out to me without hesitation. He embraced me, and in that moment, I felt a flood of emotion wash over me. I felt God's love surrounding us, a love that I had doubted for so long but now knew was real. And for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be forgiven, what it meant to forgive myself. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle in. When I opened them again, I knew that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but I had found peace. I had found a deeper connection with God, with myself, and with the people I loved. And that in itself was a miracle. With this breakthrough, everything had changed. My journey was no longer a path of individual struggle. It was a shared journey of hope, redemption, and grace. I had been given a second chance, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has led me to this point, it's hard to put into words the depth of transformation I've experienced. It feels like I've lived multiple lives in one lifetime, each one marked by moments of pain, confusion, loss, and then, through it all, unexpected redemption. The person I am today is not the same man who once stood on the edge of despair, staring into the abyss of his mistakes, unsure of whether he would ever find peace. No, that man is gone, and I am grateful. Looking back on my near-death experience, I realize now that it wasn't just a chance encounter with the afterlife. It was a turning point. It was a divine invitation, showing me the truth about myself, about life, and about God's unyielding love. It was a message not only for me, but for everyone, because no one is beyond redemption, no matter how far they've fallen. I see now that my life is not just mine to live in isolation. It's intertwined with the lives of those around me. My father, who had once been a stranger to me in so many ways, is now someone I can truly connect with. My mother, who had been hurt by my choices, is now a source of understanding and compassion. And Kyle, my old friend, who I had so much bitterness toward, is now a brother in a shared struggle toward healing. But the greatest shift of all has been in my relationship with myself. The man who once felt consumed by guilt and shame has been replaced with someone who understands the power of grace, not just to forgive others, but to forgive himself. And that forgiveness is not just a gift for me, it's something I can extend to everyone around me. It is a bridge that connects the brokenness in all of us. As I stand here today, I realize that my journey is far from over. There will be more challenges, more struggles, more moments of doubt, but I also know that the same love that has carried me through my darkest moments will continue to guide me. It's no longer a distant idea or a set of beliefs. It's a living, breathing reality within me, a force that moves me to love, to forgive, and to live with purpose. I want to leave you with this. If you're watching this and you're struggling with your own journey, know this: there is hope. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how far you've wandered, you are not beyond the reach of God's love. I was once lost in my own darkness, but I found the light, and I'm here to tell you that it's real. It's for you too. So if you found any part of my story resonating with you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. What are the areas where you need healing? What are the moments that still haunt you, that still hold you back from embracing the life you were meant to live? And if you feel inspired by my story, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know how your story, or someone else's, might change a life. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If you're new here, I encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments. I'd love to hear about your own experiences. I'll be sharing more of my story in future videos, and I hope you'll continue to walk with me as I explore this journey of faith, redemption, and growth. Remember, it's never too late to change. The love you seek is waiting, and you're not alone in this.